Welcome back to another gripping episode of Rational Discourse Weekly. This is episode 31, filmed on Wednesday, September 18th, 2013. I'm William Garrison.
And I'm Michael Aune.
And this week we talk a little bit about Michael's recent article called The Importance of Mythos.
Yeah, which is a fun little bit. I talk about sci-fi, fantasy, and why mythology matters to people and why you shouldn't dismiss religion as mere mythology because you're overshooting the mark. And then we sort of go off on a tangent, I think, for a little while, right?
We basically bounce around some ideas of why some Christians want to move away from the term religion and focus more on, their Lord and Savior Jesus.
Yeah, why being a religion has become sort of a hang-up.
Yep, so you should watch.
So we've been gone for a little while, huh?
Yeah, been working on the site quite a bit. For those, who haven't visited recently,
you should.
We've switched hosts, but have basically been completely reworking the site. It's technically still in process, but the site is almost fully functional. It's mostly just getting the navigation down and adding features and little tweaks here and there. Our articles, our podcasts, our blog, which contains magic and other related content, whatever we feel like posting. All that stuff is there for your viewing, listening.
We're just making it prettier and easier to navigate right now. Already like what we've done. We think it's less cluttered, cleaner. We hope you like it as well. So that's cool.
Yep. So speaking of the site, Michael, your latest article called The Importance of Mythos, kind of touches on, your header graphic is of the Doctor Who series, and you even talk about
a compendium of all the Doctors, a visual compendium.
The Sandman later on, and it's easier. It might be easier for you to explain, but it seems nice that you could relate the universes of these television shows and comic books. I think the Sandman is just a comic book. I'm not sure.
Yeah, it's the comic series.
And how the mythology behind religion and how that plays into humanity, like why that's important, desirable, whatever term you want to use.
Well, religion gets at something. If it was completely devoid of any sort of either emotional attachment or there's something that it gets its hooks into people. Now, there's many, many aspects to that. You get community, you get the explanatory framework, however, sort of insufficient we think that is ultimately. There is, and for a lot of people, there's an emotional connection. And it's obvious that there's an emotional connection. It's powerful. And it's connected to the way that people are coming to their religion, which is through stories, more or less. I mean, people know their faith via the stories and the parables and the various fictions that are presented about the characters that ultimately ground that religion. And so I've sensed a tendency, and I've seen it explicitly said, and it's not by any means a widespread thing, but religion's just a myth. You hear that, like Christianity is just another myth. And it's like supposed to be swatting away the importance of Christianity by relating it to mythology. And I think that's ultimately the wrong way to go about it. Because I think mythology, even for those who are wholly secular, do not subscribe to the more magical components of it, is something that we still have that emotional attachment to. It's something that we still invest ourselves in, and to so easily dismiss it with an offhanded comment, both, I think, shows the shallowness of the objection, and two, underestimates the true power of mythology for people of any religious persuasion or non-persuasion. And that's basically what the post is. It was a short little blurb, and I didn't expect it to generate a lot of content online, but on Reddit, in the True Atheism subreddit, it actually was one of the most dynamic posts I've put up. Well over 100 comments. It's still floating near the top of or at least as of today, the 18th, still floating near the top of the page. And I literally had no idea that this was going to resonate with people, but it really got people thinking on both sides. Not everyone agreed by any means about what it is that's contained within a mythology. And I use the example of sort of secular mythologies that I personally am invested in. So I talk about, most recently, since I just finished the latest season, was Doctor Who, which has this entire world that you can become involved in. It's got effectively godlike figures, it's got heroes, it's got tragedy and comedy and all the aspects that tend to inform a lot of the older mythologies. It informs your moral code in a sense, because a lot of the choices are moral and they're on a large scale, and I think that that's important for mythology to address some of those big issues. It's not just a story, but it's a story about like how should you live. It's informing you, whether explicitly or not, in a way that just a general fiction, by like Grisham isn't gonna. A Stephen King book doesn't tell you how to live in the same way that these other mythologies can, in a sense. Like Tolkien, there's such a depth to it that it informs the way the characters live, which in a way, if you identified with that, are going to sort of give you a guideline by which to live. Now,
it seems when they create these complex universes, they do the same thing that mythology does when you talk about emotion. Yeah. They pull at your heartstrings by attaching yourself to a character's dilemma, whether they have to choose between life and death, or it's interesting how a piece of fiction, in this case, I guess what you're considering mythology, can be so important.
Like I said, it's tough because I've still been trying to figure it out. It's not just fiction. Like, fiction can be anything small, and they can get you thinking about these topics, and that's fine. But I think there does have to be a sort of a grandiose to the story. Like, there needs to be a little bit of that world building that's in it.
Yeah. I guess what I was saying is the word fiction isn't a limiting factor.
No.
It's like
not at all.
When they're starting to write and create these pieces, just because it's a fiction doesn't play down the importance that it's going to have in people's lives. And we were recently at Dragon Con, a pretty giant convention in Atlanta. It's pretty amazing the amount of people that show up. It was over 50,000.
And it's a science fiction and fantasy oriented convention, though it has other, there's like a skeptics track and a puppetry track. I mean, there's lots of things that basically nerd culture.
But what brings all of these people together are these pieces of work. The people in various costumes from Star Wars, Star Trek, Doctor Who. There's almost no limit to the amount of people that are brought together.
People really identify with these characters and these stories, and that's something you don't get with your average story.
Yeah,
you just don't with your average little one-off fiction or whatever. Doesn't quite have that depth. People don't invest themselves in it the same way. And they don't build it into themselves the same way. And I think that's what's different. Like, there are instances where something will resonate with me when I'm watching a particular show or I'm reading a particular book that both either reinforces the way that I would view the world. It's giving me that moral guideline or reinforcing it, or it makes me question, like, what would I do? Wow, like this is a tough choice. Like at the end of the first season of Doctor Who, he's given a choice basically, like, do I kill the bad guys and a whole lot of people, or do I just let this happen? In which case, a lot of people, I mean, everyone's going to die pretty much anyway, but I'm at least not like a murderer in it. Puts in your brain this thought, like, what would you do in that instance? What should you do? What is expected of you?
Yeah.
And the mythology actually gives you sort of an answer to that, which is why I think it's a little bit different from a fiction, is that it sort of assumes its own truth, as it were, which I think is interesting. And although you don't buy into the underlying truths of, like, is the Doctor real? Well, no, sadly, not. But if you ignore that, and given the truth within that own little world, it works, and you resonate It resonates with you. And I think that's very powerful. And I think the fact that people are so invested, the fact that there are 50,000 plus people who will come to a thing like Dragon Con, and you see them walking around in costumes, they lovingly made about their favorite characters that they loved for decades, things like this. That's deep. That's a sort of devotion that is part of the religious experience for many, many people, which is why I think dismissing religion as simply as myth completely overshoots the mark. You've gone too far. You're throwing the baby out with the bathwater. Religion is a destructive kind of myth because it does not recognize itself as a myth in the sense of not taken.
Yeah,
it's true.
Going off of that, it's I'm sure most Christians you would talk to, if you try to compare their religion to more ancient religions, Egyptian, Greek, Roman, whatever, they're like, well, that's ancient mythology.
Yeah.
And I think
it's like a dead mythology.
That's kind of a combination of things. That is the person that's in the religion, the Christian, the Muslim, whatever, kind of misunderstanding the power of mythology.
Yeah.
And misunderstanding the similarities between their religion and mythology.
Yeah.
Or maybe the importance of their stories. Now, I've always seen or heard little evidences of it anytime you talk about taking the Bible or whatever your holy book is as a literal story versus, taking it as a moral, a lot of people may or may not believe that the story of Noah and the great flood happened, or Adam and Eve actually weren't the first humans. That was just a story about, the beginning of mankind. And it's just kind of interesting to see these similarities, especially because when you study like Greek and Roman mythology in school, as most people do, I know I did.
I love that too. I'm going to own this segment because I read all of that shit as a kid. I got my hands on every bit of Greek and Roman mythology I could get
It's just interesting to know that basically that was the Christianity of that time. Now, obviously, we know much more about the world and the universe and everything, so I think religion plays a different role than it did, in ancient societies, mainly because they turned to religion for all their answers.
Well, there really wasn't an alternative.
Yeah.
You could look at a different religion, or you could just ignore it, but no one else offered a sort of cohesive, explanatory framework that you could really rely on and actually would make sense.
Now, obviously,
finally have.
I don't like religion. That's obviously one of the reasons why we podcast is, not only are we not part of a religion, but we don't think religion is good in any way. We don't believe it explains.
We think we'd be better off without
it.
Not necessarily the impulses that lead some people to it or certain aspects of the religious experience, but especially when we're talking about like organized religion, not even strictly belief in a God. That's sort of that's harmless in a vacuum, but yeah, we think this is bad, but you also have to be careful how you approach it.
Right. But I like that we live in a society where an individual can make the choice as to what mix they're going to basically base their life around. Are they going to rely completely on religion to explain that the earth is less than 10,000 years old? Fewer? I said less? 10, okay. Fewer than 10,000 years old.
I have very few peeves, people. Very few, but
that Jesus Christ
it's fewer, not less, if you can count it. That is all.
And just count it in general, not if it's just on one hand. I forgot what I was saying. Oh,
sorry, I just messed that all up.
No, it's fine. Basically, I like that someone can use religion if they choose to explain their worldview and everything, or they can go the exact opposite route and use science to explain everything, and that there's plenty of middle ground. Obviously, I choose to look at science for all of my answers, and that for things that are unanswered,
proven effective.
Yeah,
science.
But I like that the freedom exists. That we live in a society.
We're not trying to like establish an atheistic like dictatorship, a tyranny of unbelief. What we want to do is just make the idea itself just unattractive on its own terms where it doesn't provide the right explanations. It's not giving you the emotional satisfaction you need. It's divisive or divisive instead of, capable of bringing people together, which like all the major religions claim, with the giant ass caveat of assuming you also believe this.
Now, we've mentioned this before, but on Instagram recently, someone that I follow, I won't call them out by name, but they posted this picture. I've seen this picture before, but it's a homeless gentleman, and his sign says, "Which religion cares most about the homeless?" And he's got like 10 different bowls labeled Muslim, atheist, Hindu, Jewish, Buddhist, spiritual, agnostic, pagan, and Christian. And of course, right off the bat, you can kind of notice the Buddhist, agnostic, and atheist bowls have the most money in them. Now, that's not obviously...
It's not like a scientific study. Though I do believe it has been shown that, now this probably is tied to affluence, but atheists and agnostics, basically secularists, tend to give more, if I'm not mistaken. So that is likely tied to the fact that the more affluent you are, the more likely that you're well educated, and the less likely that you're religious. So it's not necessarily that like being an atheist or being agnostic makes you more charitable.
Right. There are probably certain things, like, for example, most churchgoers donate directly to their church. Yeah. So they're not like directly donating to the homeless or to, what's the, like Goodwill or the Salvation Army.
Yeah.
Like, if they're donating directly to their church, that basically isn't shown in normal donation standards. They're essentially funding a business. And I'm using that term loosely.
It has employees. It's got staff.
Right.
I mean, yes, it has. The church's business is sort of internalized.
At least in most
necessarily out
Protestant Christian churches, they'll... I'm guessing they do it in Catholic churches. I've never actually been in a Catholic church during service. But, they pass the collection plate around. And I know my mom would always do a 5 or a 10 or a 20. So that was her primary means of giving. It's not to say that the religious aren't giving. But the reason why I brought up this specific picture is the person that posted it basically saying Jesus is better than religion. That was the exact quote she used. And that hashtag religion divides, hashtag Jesus saves. And I thought it was interesting.
Well, there's sort of been this movement, it seems,
that they want to
separate Jesus from Christianity.
And it's really strange to me. I think it's because religion has gotten such a bad rap for so many years. Like, it's religion as a word seems to be a scapegoat for problems. It's like when people talk about the children getting molested in the Catholic Church, people just throw, well, that's the problem with religion.
That's the problem with any sort of secretive, internalized, organization that prohibits its members from having sex. Like, yeah, okay, that's going to breed sexual misconduct.
Well, and the side effect of them not involving our justice system wherever possible, so they can look at, well, my consequences of doing this are I'm going to get relocated to another parish. Yeah. So there are some complex issues there. But what's interesting is that Christians like herself are almost, they would rather say that they follow Jesus and that Jesus is God and all of these things, not that they're a part of any kind of religion.
Well, Protestantism can get away with that in a way that like Catholicism can't. Because Catholicism, the church isn't. It's absolutely fundamental to the mechanism of salvation. It is through the disbursement of the sacraments via the church that basically people are saved. Because works matter. These things matter. Now, it's not to say that there aren't loopholes and things like that, but the main idea is that the church is important and that you're supposed to come to God and Jesus through the church. Protestantism is very much individualized, which sort of lets you get away with that. So the idea is like, if you come to Jesus, but of course, if everyone's just coming to Jesus and they've all got their own ideas about what Jesus is or not, then we don't really have a set idea per se.
Without religion, Jesus is basically just a concept.
It's a really nice dude a lot of people are fans of.
Religion is really the framework that is used
religion codifies things.
Off the backbone of the Bible.
And it makes you wrong or right, which is important.
Yeah.
It lets you say you're wrong about this, whereas spirituality doesn't really let you do that, which is sort of what they're like, sort of like Jesus spirituality.
Yeah,
I want to be spiritual, and I'm going to direct it towards Jesus.
I think if I had to guess, I think it's a drive to make religion or Christianity in general more appealing to the younger crowd. We're by far the most educated and connected society of children and under 25-year-olds in history, and I think that is what's helped drove religion out of people's lives.
I think too, I think morality in many, many ways was a real driving factor, because there are these moral prohibitions that people just didn't agree with anymore.
Gay marriage is
that's the current hot button, but I mean, you have everything down to premarital sex.
Yeah,
that's a big one. Just sort of the idea that you'll pass strict judgment on other people, saying, you'll burn in hell, and you're doomed to eternal torment. Like, people don't want to say that. They don't want to think that as a general rule. That's sort of dark and depressing. And I think that for a while there was a sort of firebrand, especially in America, Christianity, that was going around, and people rejected it. They go, we're more moderate than that. I think the moderation of the people is forcing religion either to the extremes, which I think we're seeing. You get things like Westboro Baptist Church, which is a very small organization but catches a lot of airtime. Or it's forcing sort of the opposite thing, which is the opposite extreme, which is trying to almost eliminate the religion itself.
Yeah. Because
every time a religion throws up, this is how it is, you've automatically created a dividing line for anyone who disagrees. So yeah, saying religion's stupid, Jesus saves. I mean, it's hard to argue against that because it's vacuous. It has no content except for Jesus. And like, Jesus as a concept, let's say that you're not an atheist or an agnostic, there's no immediate objection to that. You can disagree about something about Jesus, but you can't say, well, I disagree with these rules, and I disagree with these teachings and these beliefs and these sacraments. You can't throw any of that out if you're going with the spiritual track. So it avoids the pitfalls of creating those dividing lines, but then sort of empties itself of anything that makes it recognizably religious.
Yeah, I don't think it has any staying power, at least. I don't like what it's trying to do, obviously, which is another way.
I do, though, because it hurts the ability of people to act as a cohesive group with a religious orientation. I think it's a step away from monolithic religion towards individualized religion, which hopefully then, as people feel less and less pressure, there's less and less of that religious beast on your back.
Yeah, don't get me wrong.
It'll be easier to just toss it away.
I think it's attractive to certain people. I guess I'm trying to think from my viewpoint. If I still believed in some form of God, it would be hard for me to believe in something just based off of an idea or off of a feeling.
Yeah, because
I would still want to go to church. I would still want to read a holy book and read these stories. And to me, if you're doing that but not calling it a religion, you're just lying to yourself.
I think that's fair. I think there is a lot of semantic wordplay happening. There's a lot of fudging the numbers, as it were, to make things line up the way you want.
But quickly, before we finish up, there's another article/video. I won't play the video, but I'll just mention it. Basically, there are two ways to sort of attack what I'll call the religion problem. So earlier, you mentioned that the way that basically we're going about it is trying to discredit their arguments and trying to offer a more holistic or a more intelligent, logical, rational worldview. The other side is to basically, or not the other side, I guess it's paired, is to basically talk about the importance of science and what science has done for us in the past, what it's doing for us, and basically where it can take us in the future. So Bill Nye, who was a pretty famous scientist, had a show that played during most of our childhoods, and he's.
And if you don't know about it, you've missed out.
He's continuing to do stuff. He started to do some videos on YouTube, but he was on the Bill Maher show recently. And Bill Maher's a pretty famous atheist, I guess. Like he he makes his stance on religion pretty well known.
Yeah.
And Bill Nye basically came on the show with a similar attitude to Neil deGrasse Tyson, basically saying, I'm not here to talk down on anyone's religion. He's like, I don't care about that discussion. But basically, if you say the Earth is less than 10,000 years old, you're wrong. Fewer than 10,000 years old. And, talking about getting creationism out of the classrooms in Texas, because that's a fight that's going on, the whole global warming debate. Bill Nye has been very present in the political debates recently. I mean, he's been on Fox News and other news channels anytime some of these discussions come up, because as a scientist, he wants to make sure that they have a voice against the far right that denies global warming, denies evolution, that basically tries to throw these scientific discussions and debates completely out. So it was interesting to see. I'll link the video in the show notes, but it's good to see people like him fighting for science, which is something that you and I care about quite a lot.
Yep, so. For sure. Also, he's just a fun dude. So.
And he rocks a bow tie, similar to... Don't the doctors all wear bow ties, or just some of them?
No. Matt Smith's doctor is the most recent one to rock a bow tie. And he has
the
catchphrase that's, bow ties are cool. Among other things. Fezzes are also cool. There are many things that are cool. But in any case, I think that wraps it up for this week.
Yeah.
So hopefully you have headed over to the site at some point and you've liked the changes. Any feedback would be appreciated. We're very much in the experimental phase right now as far as getting everything fudged into the form that we want.
Yeah. Quick note about the podcast in audio form. I've had to do a lot of work to get it put back into iTunes because when we migrated the site, I had some issues, and I wanted to make sure that our complete catalog of back episodes was available, which wasn't possible with the old site. So all of this will be fixed at some point, but if you listen to this episode fairly close after its launch date, we might not be listed on iTunes at the moment. I'm working on fixing that. I know the solution, I just have to take the time to actually do it. But once we're listed on iTunes, we'll also be listed in other platforms. So if you have friends on Android or Windows Phone or just want to listen on a computer and don't have iTunes, there will be other solutions as well. As always, or as a more recent fix, I've been also adding the audio links and the actual player to our podcast on each individual episode on our website, which again is 37g.tv, or if you just want to see the Rational Discourse Weekly episodes, it's rdw.37g.tv. We've created little short links for some of our content. So, other than that, I think that's everything.
Yeah. New articles still going up, new podcasts. So keep coming back. We'll be here. Yay! 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 And we're done.